On her return from Cologne in March 1589, Maria Pepelings settles in the Kleinen Sint Arnold, a house on the Meer, 2 houses up from the trees on the road on the right here. Facing Antwerp's main commercial thoroughfare to the north, the house backs onto a sun-drenched bleaching grounds to the south. With a well, a small stream, and the southern exposure, it was the perfect setting for a bleaching grounds. A symbolic blank canvas on which the city had effectively erased part of its turbulent recent past. Not a trace was left of a Calvinist temple previously erected on the site. The map is Virgilius Bononiensis' spectacular 1565 bird's-eye view of the city, drawn up a year before the round reformist church was built, only to be demolished a year later. It stood right behind the row of large trees in the middle. It was a blank canvas for Maria's fresh start too, after the scandal of her husband's affair with William of Orange's wife, Anne of Saxony, and the resulting banishment to Siegen, where Rubens was born. She had taken all precautions to make sure this unsavory episode was forgotten, washed out. This was to be the first corner of Antwerp that the 11-year-old boy would get to know intimately, a blank canvas on which to romp in between washerwomen and swathes of bleached linen. Could he have imagined at that point that one of the most colorful careers of European art history was to unfold on this very spot 21 years later? And who could think of such a thing as the main artist of the Northern Counter-Reformation living and working on the remnants of a Calvinist temple? This, a place to forget, would become a place to remember. Even from this short introduction, it is clear that the site itself is an extraordinary place. The Rubens house is what the French call un musée de site. The site itself is in many ways the main attraction, the promise of walking in the footsteps of the master being a big draw. Many visitors assume the place unchanged, preserved under a bell jar since 1640. But while defining elements of the architectural ensemble are entirely original, the portico and garden pavilion in particular, and parts of the cellars and attics too, much, if not most, of the house has been rebuilt to live up to the expectations of 20th century visitors. All of the collection has been acquired since the 1940s, so there are no paintings on view that have remained in the house since Rubens' death. Strictly speaking, there is no art in situ to be seen here, none. You might, in fact, start wondering what I am doing here. Sometimes a visitor will ask me whether the giant yew tree in the garden was planted by Rubens himself. We know exactly when the tree was planted, in the late 18th century. But my answer tends to depend on the tone of voice and the look in the inquisitive visitor's eyes, which might be hopeful or detached. I might say it was planted in the 1780s, or yes, it just might have been planted by Rubens. Does this make me into a liar? The tree stands like a sentinel and adds gravitas and antiquity to the place, anchoring the setting into longue durée. While it has nothing to do with Rubens, it undoubtedly adds to the genius loci, the spirit of place. To summarize and to balance out the rather pretentious reference to Gombrich in the title of my talk with a reference from popular culture, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. In other words, how to balance scholarly rigor with effective storytelling. One of a very few objects stemming from the Rubens house site before it was transformed into a museum between 1937 and 1946 is this terracotta sculpture of a dog. I find him rather fetching. We have no idea where exactly he was found, so he's just art in situ by approximation. Forgive him, he has no legs. We don't know if Rubens himself owned the dog. One can be seen on 2 engravings showing the house in 1684 and 1692. But is that a real dog, or perhaps our sculpted dog? What purpose did this terracotta canine serve? Visitors are unattentive of his special status and tend to pay little mind to our unpettable dog. Let's call him Rembrandt. For me, he is a bit of a mascot, taking up a distinguished space just beneath several Rubens oil sketches, a far higher station in life than my own pooch could ever aspire to. Poor Rembrandt couldn't catch a frisbee if he wanted to, never needs a walk or barks, but through his traditional iconographical role of signifying fidelity, he does remind me of our greatest challenge: how to present a collection that was assembled centuries after Rubens's death in a house that was altered through the ages and fitted out to be a museum in the 1940s, while still allowing for a certain form of mythical communion with the artist at the heart of the site. Today, the vast majority of the paintings that were produced in Rubens's purpose-built studio have left Antwerp. Some have remained in the collections for which they were initially destined, others have been traded again and again to end up in august public depositories like the Mauritshuis or private collections all over the world. Most of the art produced here was never even intended to stay, although some of it did for a while. If the Rubens House can claim that art can be seen here in situ, it is a particular claim, one about the very earliest stages of the social lives of these coveted pictures. Simply by returning a Rubens to its place of origin, a special kind of art in situ is created, an unfair advantage, I admit. The museum does this through several means: works in the permanent collection, works on loan, and works reunited for a temporary exhibition. This view shows an unfinished work from the permanent collection on the left, Henri IV at the Battle of Ivry. To its right, centrally positioned, a prestigious loan from the Thompson collection at the Art Gallery of Ontario, The Massacre of the Innocents, a spectacular picture circa 1610, painted shortly after Rubens's return from Italy. A quintessential Rubens with all the color, dramatic lighting, and violent action that we have come to associate with the artist. While the loan is a perfect fit for the museum, the picture was in fact never on this site. Its early provenance can be traced to a house on the Mer, just around the corner, but it certainly wasn't painted here. Rubens bought the house in 1610, and the roof on the workshop wasn't finished until 1615. It was most probably painted in a studio in the house of his parents-in-law in the Kloosterstraat or elsewhere in Antwerp. If we were to adhere strictly to displaying paintings that were at some point on the site, we would have to restrict ourselves to later pictures. The loan isn't a falsification of history, it tells an important episode in Rubens's career. So again, scholarly rigor and storytelling are balanced. The picture to its left from the permanent collection was most definitely painted in the Rubens house, around 1628 to 1631. This is an exceptional fit with the studio in which it is displayed, as it is unfinished, abandoned in the midst of the act of creation, evoking the artist at work. It has the look of a giant oil sketch and allows us to discuss Rubens's technique and the modus operandi of the workshop in a very condensed and accessible manner. The contribution of battle scene specialist Peter Snijers on top speaks of Rubens's knack for collaboration. The swift brushstrokes used to outline the figures in the foreground, the lead white highlights, and the adaptations to poses testify to Rubens's speedy process. From here on, assistants would take over to fill in the composition. As I've said, pictures in the earliest stages of their lives take the Rubens house closest of all to the principles of art in situ. Alas, they are exceedingly rare. Another recent loan is the Martyrdom of St. Andrew from the Fundación Carlos de Amberes in Madrid. Painted in 1638, it was most certainly produced in the workshop in which it was displayed. Such a return after nearly 400 years is always a festive occasion. Again, the purpose isn't to show a painting in the context for which it was intended, and which incidentally no longer exists. The purpose is to show it in the context in which it was created. Commissioned by Jan van der Vught, a representative of the Antwerp Plantin Moretus printing house in Madrid, through the mediation of Rubens's friend Balthasar Moretus, the work also tells of the European networks into which Rubens could tap to sell his art, and of the very mobility of that art. To the right is Rubens's Annunciation, a painting that was started shortly after his return from Italy, but finished only by 1628. It spent a considerable amount of time in the workshop before it was sold to the Marquess of Leganés during Rubens's stay in Madrid from 1628. This prolonged stay adds to its attractiveness for display here and illustrates Rubens's tendency to rework, adapt, or enlarge earlier compositions. Incidentally, this was the very first painting by Rubens to be shown in the museum in 1954, a full 8 years after it opened to the public. In 2015, Ben van Beneden organized the exhibition Rubens in Private. This was a very special event for the museum team. Returning a wealth of family portraits whose sitters had once inhabited the house in which they were now reunited and displayed, was a touching experience. Whereas returning other paintings by Rubens to the house and studio on the Wapper brings a jolt of pleasure, this was an altogether different sensation. While no inventory of the house is known, and we can hence not attempt to display pictures in their original location, it was as if the house was populated again with its famous inhabitants. Such notions are, of course, romantic, but I feel that we would be mistaken to shun all romanticism. Bringing Rubens' self-portraits and those of his wives and children back home was a powerful experience. Stricto sensu, this project did not meet the criteria for art in situ. Lato sensu, though, it very much focused on the relation between art and sight and how both could enhance one another. Rubens' activities as a painter were closely tied to his activities as a collector. While we have a firm grasp on the content of his collection through different periods of his life, the museum cannot hope to fully reassemble this formidable treasure trove on a permanent basis. In 2004, the exhibition A House of Art, Rubens as Collector, presented a significant selection, sourced from collections all over the world. A very recent acquisition, installed in the museum this February, adds to the permanent display. This 2nd century AD marble sculpture from Greece or Asia Minor is a trapezophoros, a decoratively carved table leg. Acquired from the Flemish art dealer Daniel Nys in Venice by Dudley Carton, it was traded with the latter by Rubens in return for paintings in 1618. In a letter, Rubens stated that he much preferred paying with fruits from his own garden rather than with those bought in the market. The boy, carrying a torch and a basket of fruit and flowers, and identified as Hesperus during a circa 1600 restoration, stayed with Rubens until he sold it to George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, in 1626 for cold, hard cash. 4 full centuries after his 8-year stay in the Rubens house, the boy has returned to Antwerp. We know that Rubens built a semicircular gallery to display his sculpture collection. Through the centuries, the space was changed into a chapel and lost its original function. It was recreated during the 1940s restoration campaign on its original site. This youngest yet oldest inhabitant of the Rubens house perfectly embodies our approach to art in situ. He might not meet the restrictive criteria for inclusion in this rarest of categories, but to us it is very much close enough. He is like a rod of plutonium in the reactor vessel of this gallery, a piece of authentic art from Rubens' collection, powering what is to a large extent an illusion. In the late 17th century, a visitor to the Rubens house, Franciscus Desiderius de Sevin, praised the garden, stating that Hesperis hic fructus cessit, that Hesperis, one of Hesperus' daughters, shed her fruits here. A full generation after Rubens' tenancy, and long after he had sold the statue, the line of praise makes for a romantic suggestion of continuity. The spirit of the absent statue of Hesperus transfigured into a poetic evocation of his daughter Hesperis. The marble fruits in the boy's basket, paid for by the fruits of Rubens' own garden, have metamorphosed in the metaphorical fruits of the actual garden. Spirit of place, or genius loci, is made up of these types of strange coincidences. In a museum like the Rubens house, teasing out such pleasing continuities is central to reinforcing the spirit of place, in this case one of fruitfulness. While the cynic might look at the ensemble and decide it is a lie, in reality it is more of a poem. Through the ages, license has been taken to present the house of the artist to the public in a satisfying manner. Opinions have differed on what should be restored, what should be renovated, what should be reconstructed. In many ways, the site has been dreamed up. It is no longer a blank canvas. But it is crucial to realize that this mirage is very much anchored by art in situ. Curators in charge of historic houses will be all too familiar with the challenges involved in presenting them truthfully to the public. The true story of these places and the collections they harbor are so complex, so nuanced, so intricate, that even long acquaintance won't reveal the full story. History and life are unforgiving, and for something to come to us unblemished through the centuries, unmoved, unchanged, set in aspic, is exceedingly rare. You want the truth, you can't handle the truth. My plea hence is not to fetishize art in situ. I believe in poetic license, in the power of informed suggestion, in accommodating the public in its wish to communicate with the past. All the while, of course, while keeping our beloved Rembrandt in mind and the fidelity and scholarly zeal for which he stands. Oh, And returning to your question, you are right. The tree just might have been planted by Rubens. Thank you for your attention.